Ave Maria in the Afternoon is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Welcome to Ave Maria in the Afternoon, examining the world through the lens of faith from the heart of the Church to help us navigate the culture. Here's Dr. Marcus Peter.
Good afternoon, and welcome to this hour of Ave Maria in the Afternoon. I'm Marcus Peter. Real joy to be with all of you today, and we have a treat before us. So, as usual, every Friday we are joined by my friend Rob Corzine of the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology, and he'll be unpacking for us the readings this weekend and all the covenant themes thereof. And Rob borrows from a tremendous wealth of resources that the St. Paul Center puts out, including resources by Dr. Scott Hahn and Dr. John Bergsma and himself and his own reasoning. And it's just, they create a treasure trove of biblical exegesis, and we're very blessed to be able to do these segments. We go on from there to speak with Dr. Eduardo Echeverria. The concept of the development of doctrine is frequently misunderstood today. I'm rejoicing because St. John Henry Newman, who had a profound impact in my early entry into the Catholic Church, is now to be named the 38th Doctor of the Church. And there are three criteria for the naming of a Doctor of the Church. It's high learning and copious teaching, and then it has to be formally declared, and there's a lasting impact of their teaching. And then John Henry Newman fulfills these, and from there, his work continues to be explored. And so even when I was at Ave Maria University, his work informs certain structures of how we think about the development of doctrine, about assenting to truth in terms of faith being an assent of the intellect, but he also makes the argument that faith has its place in the will because we choose to assent. And honestly, we can sometimes emotivize the experience of faith when in reality, when we think about faith, our wills make a decision of belief of that which has been revealed. And it's a powerful experience, to be sure, but it's also more, but what's more powerful is the life of grace that's poured into us upon the assent. So Dr. Eduardo Echeverria is going to unpack for us how Newman understood doctrine as developing. And can church teaching really change? Because that's been one of the issues that we've been facing in modernity. The question of whether a pope can suddenly come along and completely change a perennial doctrine. The answer is no, but we need to understand what the church has taught on this and how properly to understand it. All this after the headlines.
Thank you, Marcus, and good afternoon, everyone. This is your Ave Maria Radio News for Friday, August 1st. It's the feast of St. Alphonsus Liguori, and today's news is brought to you by the Ave Maria family of funds. Learn more at AveMariaFunds.com. President Trump is not accepting the latest jobs report and has reportedly fired the Labor Department's statistics chief. The report says the U.S. economy added just 73,000 jobs last month, well below estimates. It also revised the May and June numbers downward by more than 200,000 jobs combined. Trump took to social media and implied the labor statistics chief manipulated the data for political purposes and ordered the Biden appointee to be fired. The Federal Trade Commission is investigating potential unfair or deceptive trade practices regarding transgender surgeries and drugs. Launch of the federal inquiry is designed to gauge the harms consumers may be experiencing from false or unsupported claims about transgender treatment. The agency's investigation comes after President Donald Trump pledged to end federal support for transition drugs and surgeries in an executive order he issued at the outset of his administration this year. Jeffrey Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell is now being held at a minimum security prison in Texas. Her lawyer confirmed her move from Florida today, but no reason was given. The transfer comes 1 week after Maxwell was interviewed by the Justice Department in Tallahassee related to the Epstein case. And on this day in rock and roll history in 1981, MTV made its debut at 12:01 a.m. The first clip shown on a new cable channel was The Buggles. Video killed the radio star. The late J.J. Jackson was one of MTV's original 5 VJs, along with Martha Quinn, Nina Blackwood, Mark Goodman, and Alan Hunter. From the Ave Maria Radio.net news desk, I'm Dan McGraw.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. All things are vanity, so goes the book of Ecclesiastes in this Sunday's first reading. And in the Gospel, Jesus warns us of the rich man who tried to store his treasures on earth and paid the price. We unpack the readings with Rob Corzine. Rob is Vice President of Programs for the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. Rob, how are we today?
We are doing great. We're in the middle of our transition between the Applied Biblical Studies Conference and the Defending the Faith Conference here in Steubenville, so we're lots of friends coming and going today.
Well, I'm really glad to hear everything's going well, and also really glad you're here. Let's jump right into this.
Yeah, so this is the Sunday of as Pope Francis talks about it. I long for a poor church for the poor, and so we have a Sunday where we're trying to get our priorities right. I think is maybe the overarching theme, that riches are fleeting and empty, and we want to store up treasure in heaven, as Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. But we start with Ecclesiastes. This is the only time that this book of the Old Testament is read at all during Sundays and holy days. So this is our one shot here, and we begin with the great theme, Vanity of Vanities, says Koheleth. Vanity of vanities, all things are vanity. Here's one who's labored with wisdom and knowledge and skill, and yet to another who has not labored over it, he must leave his property. This also is vanity and a great misfortune. For what profit comes to a man from all the toil and anxiety of heart with which he has labored under the sun? All his days sorrow and grief are his occupation. Even at night his mind is not at rest. This also is vanity. So this character here, Koheleth, is it's an unusual word in Hebrew, and it's often translated the preacher, but really a better translation would be just the leader of a congregation. The collection of the Jewish people is the kahal, right. The assembly, a congregation. That's where we get Koheleth. So the Greeks just translated that and gave us, the leader of a congregation, or an ecclesia, Ecclesiastes, and then we translate that into Latin and it comes into English just letter for letter. And this theme of vanity is important, but we can often misunderstand it. Like, we think of vanity as like thinking too highly of yourself or what people think of you, and that's really not the sense of the Hebrew word here. It's more sort of futility or being ephemeral. The Hebrew word literally means like just a breath of air. So it's just a fleeting wisp. And the tradition has often taken these books together that appear together in the Greek and in the Latin. Ecclesiastes is always a sandwich between Proverbs and Song of Songs. And so the tradition has said Ecclesiastes represents the purgative way, Proverbs represents the illuminative way, and the Song of Songs represents the unitive way, the path to God through the acquisition of knowledge. Proverbs, the path to God through the approach through detachment from things of this world. In Ecclesiastes and the Song of Songs, the way of love and communion. What we have here is this notion of vanity. It's a kind of thought experiment that he's going through. He's like, is pleasure the greatest good? No, that's vain. What about labor and wealth and building something? No, that's vain. He's looking at all of the things that people tend to value, that they tend to sometimes put as their highest good, and he's like, all of those are havel. Those are this breath of wind to be just blown away. And so we have a kind of a negative proof. Throughout the whole book, he doesn't seem to even come to a conclusion to say, like, that's bad, but this is better. So Ecclesiastes is somewhat kind of the bad news that anticipates the good news. Or some have said, and I really like this, Ecclesiastes is the question whose answer is Christ. If we say, what's the meaning of life? Is there anything new under the sun? Ecclesiastes asks. Nope. Who can show it'll be better afterwards? Nope. Who can tell me how it'll be? All of these things that we strive for, that we think are going to bring us happiness, don't. And so it poses the question whose answer is Jesus. And that brings us to the Psalm. We have Psalm 90. This is the only psalm in the Psalter that's attributed to Moses. It's the beginning of Book 4 of the Psalter, the most introspective and reflective and sometimes melancholy of the 5 books of the Psalms. Mm-hmm. And Psalm 90 follows immediately on the disastrous and catastrophic Psalm 89. It begins with the glorification of the Davidic king and the covenant, and then 2/3 of the way through abruptly switches to a narrative of the destruction of Jerusalem and the capture, imprisonment, and exile of the Davidic king. And so the Davidic covenant seems to have come to an end, and then Israel turns back here in Psalm 90 to Moses, as it were, to receive some advice and consolation. And we read, "You turn man back to dust, saying, 'Return, O children of men, for 1,000 years in your sight are as yesterday, now that it is past, or as a watch of the night. You make an end of them in their sleep. The next morning they are like the changing grass, which at dawn springs up anew, but by evening wilts and fades. Teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain wisdom of heart. Return, O Lord, how long? Have pity on your servants. Fill us at daybreak with your kindness, that we may shout for joy and gladness all our days. And may the gracious care of the Lord our God be ours. Prosper the work of our hands for us. Prosper the work of our hands." So, just like in the first reading, he sees all of my work is not going to go to me. It's going to go to someone else. It's all going to, in the end, come to nothing and be consumed or be forgotten. Here the psalmist, Moses in this case, is sort of reminding us, that we need to number our days aright. We need to gain wisdom of the heart, from the Lord, so that the work of our hands in serving Him are not lost. Because otherwise, there's going to be emptiness. We need Him to establish the work of our hands, to empower us to accomplish something of lasting value. So that mood kind of resonates with the meditations of Ecclesiastes mm-hmm. in that first reading. And then we get to our second reading. Now, again, the second reading is usually not correlated tightly. It's not chosen to go with the first reading in the gospel. Like the first reading in the gospel are always chosen to go together. Here we're just sort of reading through Colossians, but it fits really, really well, sort of by providence. And we read in Colossians, we're starting in chapter 3, "Brothers and sisters, if you were raised with Christ, seek what is above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Think of what is above, not of what is on earth, for you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ your life appears, then you will appear with Him in glory. Put to death then the parts of you that are earthly, immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and the greed that is idolatry. Stop lying to one another, since you have taken off the old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed for knowledge in the image of its Creator."
We are continuing this conversation on the other side of the break with our friend Rob Corzine, unpacking the mysteries of this weekend's readings. And as we've seen, there's a kind of almost divine cynicism behind the language, and yet the truth is evident. God is in control. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Hi, I'm Dr. Marcus Peter, host of Ave Maria in the Afternoon and Unveiling the Covenants. Ave Maria Radio has been at the forefront of dialoguing faith at the intersection of all things pertaining to human flourishing. We need your help. Our infrastructure is in urgent need of updating. We want to ask you to support us in this summer campaign. Every gift, no matter how big or small, will be useful to bringing the gospel to the ends of the earth. Thank you. You are broadcasting hope with us.
Every woman deserves specialized health care. At Arbor Women Health, our team of compassionate professionals listen to our patients and want to understand what they're going through. They serve everyone from teen girls to seniors. Our faith-based clinicians specialize in obstetrics, gynecology, fertility awareness in crisis, or unexpected pregnancies. Call 734-930-4020 or visit arborwomenhealth.org. Arbor Women, faith-inspired, dignity-affirming healthcare.
Hello, Steve Ray here from Footprints of God Pilgrimages. The land of our Lord and our Lady is calling us. We're heading back to the Holy Land over Christmas break this year. We have the best, most reliable guides and services awaiting us. The holy sites are open, and the local Christians are anxious to see us. Galilee, Jerusalem, Nazareth, Bethlehem. No crowds, no lines. Hope you can join us.
Find the Ave Maria Radio travel tab at avemariaradio.net. When I heard other business owners say they finally found someone in the credit card industry they can trust, I wondered how he could help me. So when Mark from Schisler CPC offered to show me where all the money goes for credit card processing with a free analysis of my business, I jumped on it. He reviewed how the industry works, where we could save, and offered a no-contract guarantee on savings and excellent customer service. I'm saving thousands of dollars a year. Schisler CPC. Trust in them.
More information available on the Ave Maria website under Sponsor Business Directory.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with Rob Corzine of the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. Rob, just to pick up from where you left off, I wonder if you could also just briefly comment on the very clear cynicism behind not just the language of Koheleth, but also the language of the Psalms, and what's the church trying to communicate to us through that?
Yeah, we're inclined to look and to seek after pleasure, to seek after. I mean, Aristotle says, right, the goal of human life is happiness, and so the church points us at people who would know better, so Koheleth says, is it wisdom? This is broadly understood to be King Solomon. He begins saying he's the king of over Jerusalem and the son of David. So is it wisdom? No, he tries that, and he ends up saying, and much wisdom is much vexation, and he increases knowledge, increases sorrow. Okay, well, is it pleasure? No, he's tried all of that. This is the guy, remember, with 700 wives and 300 concubines. Right. He's planted gardens and parks and made himself pools and singers and like, nope, even that doesn't work. So maybe it's not knowing stuff. Maybe it's not the vanity of self-indulgence. Is it philosophy in the Greek sense of living wisely? No, that doesn't have it. All the stuff comes to an end and doesn't amount to anything. And then here we have the psalmist now with a godly perspective, saying, teach us to number our days aright, that we can gain wisdom of heart. Like we have foolish hearts that run after a lot of different things, but there's really, as we had last year, right, the unum necessarium, the one thing necessary. Mm-hmm. So it's prosper the work of our hands. Not like stop working, but like our work is only fruitful when it's offered to God, when He establishes the works of our hands. And in the second reading, right, we have this kind of weird juxtaposition, right? He begins with, if you were raised with Christ, seek that which is above, for you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. So he begins with saying, you've died and raised, now act like it. So we have died and we've been raised, but then we have to put to death the earthly parts, immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and the greed that is idolatry and lying. We have this reality that's given to us by grace, and then we've got to embody that in our actions and in our lives. It's sort of, to borrow from the Lion King, right? Become what you are, Simba. And then in the gospel, we get explicitly a teaching from our Lord about, again, that vanity, but how we can avoid that vanity. So someone in the crowd, we read, this is Luke 12, 13 and following, says to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." He replied to him, "Friend, who appointed me as your judge and arbitrator?" Then he said to the crowd, "Take care to guard against all greed, for though one may be rich, one's life does not consist of possessions." He then told them a parable. There was a rich man whose land produced a bountiful harvest. He asked himself, "What shall I do, for I do not have space to store my harvest?" And he said, "This is what I shall do. I shall tear down my barns and build larger ones. There I shall store all my grain and other goods, and I shall say to myself, now as for you, you have so many good things stored up for many years. Rest, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this night your life will be demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, to whom will they belong? Thus will it be for all who store up treasure for themselves, but are not rich in what matters to God." So here's the right answer to the emptiness that the writer of Ecclesiastes tells us, is that we can store up riches in a way. We can store up treasure by what we do in respect to the matters to God. So, and this should be clear in the context of Luke. This is part of the sort of death march to Jerusalem, the travel narrative of Luke 9 to 11. And on this way, Jesus is teaching the values we have to live as Christians who share with Jesus the road to the cross. No one who's decided to deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow Jesus needs to get bogged down in fighting and haggling over obtaining earthly wealth or storing it up. Now, it's important at this point to make sure that we're clear. It's not the production of wealth per se that merits this condemnation, but his plan to hoard it up for his own comfort. The production of wealth can be good. The productivity of the land of the wealthy man could have been an indication of natural virtues, of prudence and self-discipline and hard work. And material poverty is not in itself virtuous, right? It can just be the result of laziness and imprudence and addiction or some other vice. So Jesus teaches that blessed are the poor in spirit. That can be interpreted as those who are poor for the sake of the Spirit, that is, for spiritual ends, not simply because of bad luck or laziness or incompetence. Interestingly, it never occurred to Solomon in Ecclesiastes that was something he could do with his money, that he could expend his money in the alleviation of poverty or in other investments in the human community, and that somehow that would come back to him. Now, that's in Ecclesiastes. In the Proverbs, we actually have that principle laid down specifically. Proverbs 9:17 says, "He that has pity on the poor lends unto the Lord, and that which he has given he will pay him again." So you want to, the idea that we can lend to the Lord by giving to the poor is this sort of beautiful idea, because like Jesus, God never has a bad debt. Right. If you want to put your money in a savings account that can't be devalued, that can't be stolen, the wealthy, and that means most Americans, right? The median wealth in the United States is well above the global 1%. Yep. A lot of us think of ourselves as maybe struggling here and there, but we are globally, we're the wealthy. And so the poor are given to us as a gift, and we are given to them, to care for them. And that's not just the materially poor. So we've got the the corporal works of mercy, to feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, to clothe the naked. There's also the spiritual works of mercy, to instruct the ignorant, to counsel the doubtful, to admonish sinners, to bear wrongs patiently, to forgive offenses, to comfort the afflicted, and to pray for the living and the dead. We are given these things, and we are given our lives back by our Lord, for a purpose. Our lives are no longer our own. We've been bought with a price. We've been given this incomparable gift, and so we're not really in a position to have the same sort of values as our non-Christian neighbors, right? The American dream is fundamentally incompatible with the gospel of Christ, right? It's not 2.5 children, a spacious ranch house in the suburbs,
right?
And a dog and a new car every year. Like bourgeois Christianity that looks at more than 2 kids and say that's unrealistic or that's expensive, or that feels like our little pittances that we give back are something we should be praised for. We are given all of these good things, like our intellects, our abilities, even the ability to earn money, to be spent for love, which often means the alleviation of the suffering of the poor, and also, and that's not just the materially poor, but the spiritually poor, which may be our very wealthy neighbors. Like we are given gifts to be a gift, and in that way we store up wealth in heaven.
Rob, always a joy. Thank you very much for being a blessing to us. My guest has been Rob Corzine, Vice President of Programs at the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. And this is what the Lord calls us to do, to give generously and to love Him without reserve. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
No one should ever have to choose between feeding their family and keeping their heat on. Impossible questions like rent or diapers demand answers every day, likely in your very own neighborhood. But you can help. Hope Clinic partners with you to provide free medical, dental, food, and behavioral health care, all in Jesus' name. While others face impossible choices, your choice is an easy one. Partner with Hope Clinic today. Find out how at www.thehopeclinic.org.
St. Therese once told her sister Celine that when we trust ourselves and not God, our soul becomes barren and incapable of virtue. Her remedy? External works of charity. We all try to do it on our own sometimes without asking for God's help. At St. Paul Evangelization, we suggest sharing the gospel with someone who needs it. Check out streetevangelization.com to find a team near you where you can share the love of Jesus. If there isn't one in your area yet, perhaps God is calling you to start a team in your city. To learn more, visit streetevangelization.com.
Resetting your password, unsubscribing from emails, printing anything. Why are simple things sometimes so complicated? Thankfully, with an auto owner's insurance independent agent, getting the right coverage for your business doesn't have to be one of them, so you can get back to more important things, like learning how that printer works. That's simple human sense.
Call Choice Insurance Agency at 734-641-4200.
My dad, sharp as a tack, but getting him out for a dentist trip got harder every year. When he moved to the senior residence where he lives now, Dr. Mansour's portable dental service was a godsend. Dr. Mansour comes to wherever the homebound patient may be, whether in a nursing facility or the comfort of home. All the services you'd expect in a dentist office brought straight to the patient's door. Call 586-873-5567. That's 586-873-5567 or portabledentalservices.com.
Ron Finn here, inviting you to join Dave Basheris, Pat Odie-Murray, and me for Morning Offering, the Catholic way to start your day.
We welcome some very special guests each day, including Teresa Tomeo, Andrew Reinhardt, Dr. Ray Garendi, and Matthew Archbold. Plus, my chat with Pat, talking with Catholic experts from all over.
Plus, we're having fun along the way, so you can start your day with a smile. Morning Offering, weekday mornings at 8, here on the Ave Maria Radio family of stations.
Another year has come and gone, and whether you like it or not, Uncle Sam requires you to make an accounting.
Perhaps it's time to call Myler and Zipka. They work with you to legally minimize your tax bill and identify ways to reduce future taxes. Eliminate the nagging feeling that you're paying more taxes than you need to. Call Ken Zipka today at 734-930-5500. Myler and Zipka. Integrity, excellent value, and people dedicated to a long-term relationship. 734-930-5500.
Underwritten in part by the following nonprofit.
Are you paying high prices with a traditional health insurance company that pays for things that violate your conscience? There's an alternative available. Solidarity HealthShare is a community of faithful individuals and families that never share into immoral medical services, all while saving you money with prices starting as low as $85 per month for singles and $512 for families. Never fund another abortion with your healthcare dollars. Call 844-313-4999 to learn more.
Ave Maria School of Law is the Roman Catholic law school in the United States. Consistently ranked in the Princeton Review as one of the best and most conservative law schools, as well as pre-law's most devout law school. Ave Maria School of Law provides a traditional legal education while emphasizing how the law intersects with the Catholic intellectual tradition and natural law philosophy. Ave Maria School of Law, unabashedly Catholic, consistently excellent. For more information, visit avemarialaw.edu.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Now, as I mentioned in the open, I have been rejoicing at the declaration by Pope Leo and his papacy that St. John Henry Newman will be declared the 38th Doctor of the Church. And I celebrate for numerous reasons. Newman had a tremendous impact on my own life in the early years of my Catholicism. Joining me to talk about Newman's brilliance in thinking about the notion of the development of doctrine is Dr. Eduardo Echeverria. He holds a PhD in philosophy from the Free University of Amsterdam. He's a masterful philosopher and teacher of the faith. Ed, always great to speak with you. How are you?
Thank you. I'm fine, thank you. Always a pleasure, certainly to talk about St. John Henry Newman, now Doctor of the Church. Newman's dates, I'll say just something about that before we talk about his famous essay on the development of Christian doctrine. He was born 1801 and he died in 1890. He was made a cardinal by Leo XIII in 1875. He wrote this essay on development of Christian doctrine in order to distinguish true and false doctrinal development. But what motivated him, that book, in fact, was the motivation for him to enter into full communion with the Church. Excuse me. He'd been through everything. He spent. There's a very nice little book by the late Father Ian Kerr on the varieties of religion. And he discusses Newman's time, his conversion, his Christian conversion, evangelicalism, his time in evangelicalism, and then eventually as an Anglo-Catholic, which is where he was when he wrote this book on an essay on development of Christian doctrine. Some of his great sermons, the Oxford sermons. I always tell students they're not sermons like you've ever heard. But it's that 1830 to 1835, he had all these essays, and then he sat down, wrote an essay on development of Christian doctrine in order to respond to the objection that all these matters that were added onto Catholicism, that he was going to argue that they weren't. That there was a certain development of doctrine there.
Right.
In the first edition of the book that he wrote in 1845, he talked about tests, because you have to have certain criteria, as it were, to determine whether a development is genuine, whether it's an aberration, and so on. But then in the second edition, he talked about notes, because tests suggested some kind of more strict than he had actually laid out. But in any case, there are 7 of these quote-unquote tests, and I'll say something about each of them. One is called identity of type. So that identity of type simply means, for instance, if you're going to talk about marriage and the development of marriage, then identity of type, the question to ask there is, what is this thing called marriage? How do we understand the nature of marriage?
Right.
So identity of type, continuity of principle is the second, assimilative power, logical coherence, fecundity, he says, conservation, and vitality. Now, I always say, these are necessary, but they're not sufficient conditions, because you need what Monsignor Guarino calls ecclesial warrants.
Right.
You need ecclesial warrants. So you need these warrants in order to assess whether these developments are
valid.
Valid development. So
before we go on,
yes.
if you could, for the sake of our listeners, explain what ecclesial warrants are.
A warrant such as sacred scripture. Now, that sacred scripture is going to have a primacy. Ecumenical councils.
Right.
The doctors of the church. The Christian faithful.
Yep.
And the magisterium of the church.
Right.
Okay. Still, all these tests and attendant warrants help us to distinguish developments from change. If I may, this harkens back, because Newman was influenced by Vincent of Lorenz, the 5th century monk in his Communatoria. And in his Communatoria, Vincent distinguishes between progress and progress and religion. And he asked the question whether is there no progress in religion, says Vincent. And Vincent said, yes, there is progress, but progress is different from change, he says. Change is when one thing becomes something else. Development is going to be organic.
Yep.
And there's going to be a certain continuity.
Right.
A certain continuity.
So we have here, just again, helping to center this, we have here, therefore, the substance of the doctrine, and that remains unchanged. It is, until the end of time, going to remain unchanged. But these extra explanations, accidents, if you will, those can develop, but the substance, the essence of the doctrine can never change.
Right, that's exactly right. So, for instance, to take an example that I often give to students, if someone says, same-sex marriage is just really a development of traditional marriage, conjugal marriage. But that's not really true, because the continuity, if you ask that question, what is the identity of type? What is the nature of marriage? And then you consider the continuity of principle. Well, the continuity of principle, we find Jesus himself saying in Mark 10, referring us back to the creation text of Genesis 1:27 and Genesis 2:24. Genesis 1:27, God created man in his image, male and female, he created them. These are truths about reality. Jesus says, or the Genesis says, God created man in his image, male and female he created them. Therefore, Jesus refers us to 2:24, therefore a man shall leave his mother and his father, cleave unto his wife, and the two, which two, male and female, shall become one flesh. And so sexual differentiation is going to be a fundamental prerequisite for the two to become one flesh.
Right.
You can't have, I'll say a little bit more about this, you can't have a valid marriage, John Paul II says in the Theology of the Body, without sexual differentiation, you see. So
based on that, and based on the ecclesial warrants, Scripture, the magisterial teaching tradition of the Church, based on all of that, the Church not only won't declare homosexual couples a thing or homosexual marriage a thing, it also doesn't have the right to.
Because see, here's what Newman says. Newman says, look, a true development is that which is conservative of its original, and a corruption is that which tends to its destruction.
Right.
The continuity of principle and the identity of type, or what Oliver Crisp was a neo-Calvinist, he calls dogmatic conceptual hardcore. What is the dogmatic conceptual hardcore is what Newman refers to when he speaks of what must be conserved. Mm-hmm. It's unchangeable. It's unchangeable. I say to the students, there'll never be a time when the church says that two men can be married or two women can be married.
Right. Or that two men and two women are validly in a relationship of a romantic nature.
No, because love, I wrote an article on this in the Catholic thing a couple of years ago, because somebody in the church had said that homosexual love is a gift. I said, no, there's homosexual love is disordered form of love.
Right, exactly. My guest is Dr. Eduardo Echeverria, holds a PhD in philosophy from the Free University of Amsterdam, and he's a master philosopher and teacher of the faith. And we're talking about St. John Henry Newman's teaching on the development of doctrine, how we ought to understand as the church goes on in her ages, the growth and development of doctrine without changing the essence. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Beacon Skin and Surgeries is a comprehensive dermatology center on the border of Troy and Rochester Hills south of M59 and in Livonia. Beacon Skin and Surgeries perform full skin exams and focus on the diagnosis and treatment of all types of skin cancer and precancerous lesions. All are board-certified dermatologists and fellowship-trained surgeons. Call 248-852-1900. Beacon Skin and Surgeries, a beacon for patient care. 248-852-1900.
Honey, did you ever call Mighty Dog Roofing of Ann Arbor for that free roof inspection?
I knew I forgot something.
Roof leaks can cause mold buildup or even roof collapse. Protect your family today by calling local Catholics Dan and Mary Flanagan at Mighty Dog Roofing for a free inspection of your roof, siding, or windows. Mighty Dog Roofing, 734-224-4916. That's 734-224-4916.
Hi, I'm Father Chris Alar of the Marian Fathers of the Immaculate Conception. My new book, Understanding the Sacraments, unpacks the extraordinary gifts unique to the Catholic Church. Ever wonder why we baptize infants? Is confession in the Bible? And must wives be subordinate to their husbands? The answers to these more hot-button questions about the sacraments are on sale now from Marian Press at shopmercy.org. God bless you.
Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866-AVE-MARIA or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
Hi, I'm Dr. Marcus Peter, host of Ave Maria in the Afternoon and Unveiling the Covenants. Ave Maria Radio has been at the forefront of dialoguing faith at the intersection of all things pertaining to human flourishing. We need your help. Our infrastructure is in urgent need of updating. We want to ask you to support us in the summer campaign. Every gift, no matter how big or small, will be useful to bringing the gospel to the ends of the earth. Thank you. You are broadcasting hope with us.
Ave Maria in the Afternoon is underwritten by the following nonprofit organization: Real Estate for Life. Buying or selling your home or business property? Real Estate for Life can connect you with one of 1,400 pro-life real estate agents around the world. When Real Estate for Life receives a referral fee, they donate 70% to Ave Maria Radio and Human Life International. More information at realestateforlife.org or 877-LIFE-US1. That's realestateforlife.org.
This program brought to you in part by Ave Maria, Florida, a big kind of small town where golf carts take you everywhere and there's always something fun around the corner. Discover championship golf, resort-style amenities, and a town center full of shopping and dining. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at its heart, it's a community full of connection and charm. More than 25 model homes are available for viewing. More information can be found at AveMaria.com. That's AveMaria.com.
When the need for senior care arises, home is where the heart is.
Visiting Angels provides home care for mom or dad up to 24 hours per day, including personal care, meals, and light housework. You may select your professional caregiver with Visiting Angels. More information at visitingangels.com or at 877-374-LIVE. That's 877-374-LIVE. Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm speaking with Dr. Eduardo Echeverria, holds a PhD in philosophy from the Free University of Amsterdam and master philosopher and teacher of the faith. He is expounding for us the brilliance of St. John Henry Newman, who is to be named 38th Doctor of the Church. And this is real cause for celebration. We're talking about Newman's genius teaching on the development of doctrine. So, Ed, before we left off, you had mentioned that Vincent of Lérins had certain challenges to the notion of progress in religion. And it's common for modern scholars today to pit Vincent against Newman. But what Newman is saying is, it's not that we don't see growth. It's that the growth happens organically without divorcing from the root.
Right. There's an underlying continuity in terms a continuity of principle, identity of type, which, as I said, which means identity of type is if you ask the question, what's the nature of marriage? You know, what's the nature of marriage? And continuity of principle has to do with what are the principles that govern conjugal marriage. Fundamental to doctrinal development for Newman is the idea of propositional revelation. Newman held that revealed truths, what he called supernatural truths of dogma, in that same book, have been irrevocably committed to human language, he says. God's written revelation necessarily involves propositional revelation, assertions. That God created man male and female is an assertion. That the two shall become one flesh is an assertion. That the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us is an assertion, a revealed truth.
Or to borrow from the attacks of progressivism today, the indissolubility of marriage as a covenant, that's an assertion as well. Right, that's an assertion. So if we just for a moment, I always tell students, marriage isn't about love, okay? The integrating principle of marriage is love, and marriage is an ethical community or even a covenantal community, but that community is grounded in sexual difference. So you can't have, in our culture, you have to talk about sexual difference as what constitutes the nature of marriage. So this propositional revelation in verbalized form, or what Newman calls the dogmatical principle, is at once true, though not exhaustive, he says. Imperfect because it is human, he adds, but definitive and necessary because given from above. Right. For example, as I said in the previous session, Jesus Christ reveals to us the truth about marriage by referring us back to the creation text of Genesis 1:27 and 2:24. Here we have Newman's dogmatical principle at work. Male and female, he created them, is a dogmatical principle. And for this reason, a man will be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, he says. Now, this is important because sometimes critics of Newman and even critics of Vincent of Lérins don't understand. Remember, and even John the 23rd in his opening address to the council says he distinguishes between the propositional truths of faith and their formulations, and the subordinate clause there is that an alternative formulation. So you can deepen your understanding of what marriage is. John Paul II, in my view, has deepened our understanding of marriage because he's provided what was implicit, an anthropological grounding in sexual differentiation. And so you can't have marriage if you don't have male and female. But that doesn't mean that there isn't
a development in our understanding. We can develop the actual the proposition, the assertions. These are irreformable, but the way that they've been formulated can change, so long as they're consistent with the dogmatic conceptual hardcore, so long as they're consistent with the identity, what Newman called, the identity principle. Right. So he goes. John Paul II is the same way here. Vincent of Lorenz is the same way. John the 23rd is quoting in the opening address. He's quoting Vincent of Lorenz. He's actually quoting Vatican I because Vatican I is actually quoting Vincent of Lorenz.
Right.
Is there no progress in religion? And Vincent says, of course there is, but he distinguishes between progress and change. So homosexual quote unquote marriage is a change. Right. It's not a progress. It's not progress. It's not a development. Right. And that distinction between the propositional truths of faith and their formulations, as long as the formulation keeps the same meaning and the same judgment. Judgment has to do with truth. Huh? Yeah. If you change the meaning of marriage, let me give you an example. The Supreme Court decision on homosexual marriage, Obergefell, those that opposed the decision, the majority decision from the Lord help us, from the Catholic who wrote that, Kennedy, who wrote that decision. Yeah. So you had those that opposed it, the dissenters. They said, yes, of course there have been some developments in marriage. So, for instance, interracial marriage. That's a change, as it were, but that didn't change the structure of marriage.
Exactly, it didn't change the type.
No, it didn't. That's right. It's still male and female, or the idea, for instance, that the legal unit of marriage, that the man is somehow the legal center of it. That changed, you see, because a woman, she can have her she can have her bank accounts and so on and so on. But that didn't change. They said, Justice Roberts and Scalia and Justice Thomas, they say the structure of marriage, they said, remains the same. Yep. So Newman has also that test that you are able to assimilate. John, you're able to assimilate the culture. You're able to interact with the culture. The understanding of marriage, conjugal marriage in the scriptures, in the church's teaching, has a certain vitality. Yep. It has a certain vitality to it. And
a natural fecundity.
And a natural fecundity. That's where...
big words. A fruitfulness.
A fruitfulness, exactly. That's why John Paul II in the Theology of the Body is able to develop, because theology of the body is really about an anthropology, right, and how the body is constitutive of the person. Right. And so I always tell the students, it's no longer sufficient to say that marriage is a union of two persons.
That's right. You can't anymore because...
No, you can't, because people... No, marriage is the union of a man and a woman. Yep. Yes, of course they're persons, and of course they're embodied, and so on, but you have to say...
Male and female.
Male and female. You have to.
There was a point where we could just say two.
Well, because nobody thought that two men or two women were going to be married.
Right, right.
The Second Vatican Council didn't raise that question. It has a brilliant section in Gaudium et Spes, the Pastoral Constitution on Marriage, in paragraphs 50 and following, on the nature of marriage. But it doesn't say, well, what about, why can two men or two women? No. So you could say at that time, person. But now you have to say male and female, man and woman, and so on. And that's the dogmatic conceptual, you have an identity of type. Yeah. What is marriage? And then you have a continuity of principle. And that's the dogmatic conceptual hardcore, the propositional revelation, the revealed truth that God created man male and female. That's an unchangeable truth. Yeah. Because it's about reality.
Yeah. And to that, if I may add also, Ed, that you can comment on, the nature of the human person per se, with modern transgenderism, transhumanism, the propositional reality that you're a body-soul composite, there's no mistake in your sexual reality.
There's no mistake. So yeah, that's right. That's right. I've just written. I meant to bring it. I just wrote a volume one of this. I'm writing a series on creation redeemed, and the volume one is on redeeming sex, the battle for the body, and I discuss all those matters. Right. Volume two is on redeeming reason, the battle for faith, rationality, and truth, and then it has two parts. I just said part one of the second volume to the publisher, and I'm working on the second part, and then the third part will be redeeming culture. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so here's before we end, I just want to make a point, because too many, even what I would call neo-traditionalists, they don't really understand that there can be development such that Thomas didn't say. The only way to say it isn't the way that Thomas said it. Right. John Paul II is a Thomist, but in his writings he learned from phenomenology, from Husserl, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet there's still a continuity. And here's the thing, because that's often misunderstood. When Benedict, in his 2005 address, talked about the reception of Vatican II, and he said, well, the reception depends on the hermeneutic, the way you interpret it. And he said the way to the interpretation of Vatican II that has a hermeneutics of rupture or discontinuity, that's wrong, he said. But then he said hermeneutics of continuity, but it's not just the hermeneutics of continuity. That's where people are mistaken. It's the hermeneutics of continuity and renewal. So there's continuity and discontinuity. Otherwise, if you don't see discontinuity, how do you explain? You can't explain the change in... Right, like liturgical changes. Well, and change in ecumenism and so on. My guest has been Dr. Eduardo Echeverria. I want to say thank you to all of you who have been joining us. Ed, thank you for being here. And we've been talking about the great intellectual heritage of St. John Henry Newman, to be named 38th Doctor of the Church. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marcus Peter.